Hi everyone, I'm Paige Abbott, registered psychologist in the province of Alberta. I've been having a lot of conversations lately with family members who are connected with someone who has addiction, and it's a difficult subject. There's a lot to it, and I just thought for today I would introduce you to what I feel are some of the foundational steps in dealing with a loved one who has addiction. Living with someone who has addiction is very challenging. There's a lot of feelings that come with it. I personally grew up in a home where there was active addiction. It wasn't noticed, meaning nobody took ownership of that. It's something that to this day my family don't acknowledge or accept, but I certainly know that for me it was very impactful. It shaped how I learned how to relate to the world, how I communicated, how I engaged in relationships, and that is the case even in adulthood. So if your loved one is a partner or a parent, it is going to have an impact, of course, because this is somebody that you love and you care about. And without even knowing it, just by addiction being in the home or being in that relationship, it morphs how we interact and engage. And not just with that other person, but it actually impacts and morphs how we interact with the world. It is important that you take some time to acknowledge that impact. So it's okay to have whatever feelings that you're having about addiction being in your life and being in your loved one. If you're upset, that's okay. If you're angry, that's okay. If you're resentful, that's okay. If you're sad, that's okay. If you're accepting, that's also okay. There's no right or wrong when it comes to feelings about this or any other topic. What is important is that we take time and have spaces where we can be honest and open about those feelings. Sometimes that's only with ourselves. I know my journal and I were really good friends when I was growing up, and we still are to this day. But my journal was that safe place and that safe space where I could share and process my feelings and thoughts. Now, at the time, it often wasn't about my family and family members who were struggling with addiction, but it was about other things, other relationships, other challenges that I was having. And it was just nice to have that outlet, especially because I couldn't have those conversations with my caregivers. And you may be in the same spot, that it doesn't feel comfortable or safe or helpful for you to have intimate and emotionally focused conversations with your loved one. And so you need to find other safe places to release those feelings. So if that's in a journal, great. If that's through artwork, that can be helpful as well. And it can also be through conversation with support people. So these may be friends, these might be support groups, it might be a professional, and it might be people that you've connected with for a long time that you can be open and honest with your thoughts and feelings about. But it's important that you feel safe and you feel connected in that relationship to be able to open up and to share about that. Another key part of having a loved one who has addiction issues is boundaries. The reality is that there's your loved one, and then there's their addiction. And I am going to make some videos about that in upcoming weeks. So stay tuned and stay posted for those about how we can start to identify that healthy part of self from that not so healthy part of self, which you've identified for yourself is the addiction in your loved one that just leads them to engage in substance use and or behaviors that are not healthy or helpful for them or for the relationship as a whole. So once you've identified that, it's important to start to modify your engagement and your behaviors based on who you're interacting with. And I know that that can be difficult to always tell apart, but once I've talked with family members, they do have that recognition based on their intuition, based on their feelings, and just based on their logic and their reason of when they're talking to the healthy part of their family member and when they're talking to the addiction. The addiction is often very closed, it can be rigid, it's very manipulative, it's controlling, it's conniving, it's not very open to feelings-based conversations, it's defensive, it can be offensive, it's shameful, and so that face of addiction is very well known to you by this point. You just may not have described it to yourself as such. It can become blurred with your loved one. And so it is important to start to tease apart the loved one's face and personality and behavior from their addiction's face and personality and behavior. There's those two separate entities existing within them, and so it's important that you pick those moments to engage with the healthy part of your loved one, but have some disengagement and some boundaries when the addiction part is front and center and active, because to talk with that part isn't going to be productive and isn't going to get you anywhere fast. The other and probably most essential part of being in a relationship with a loved one who has addiction is your own self-care and your own recovery. So it is essential that you take the action steps to do the things that you've been hoping your loved one would do probably for a long time now. And I'm not just talking about the very superficial behaviors of maybe disengaging from a substance or behavior that's problematic for them, but there's lots of other things that you've been watching your family member and hoping that they would do. Maybe you're hoping that they will go seek professional help. You might be hoping that they'll take up some self-care activities, that they would get back to that hobby that they used to really enjoy, or the things that they used to really enjoy. You want to see them exercise and move their bodies, perhaps. You want to see them doing some journaling or doing some meditation, reading some informative literature and books, maybe engaging with a support group. I can guarantee you've mapped out a very helpful and comprehensive support plan for your loved one, whether you know it or not. And now it's time to start taking pieces from that and applying it to your own self and your own life, because the things that you know will be of benefit to your loved one will be of benefit to you as well. And recovery in the home and in the household can have a trickle-down effect. I'm not going to say it always does, because sometimes where people are at, their addiction is just too progressed and too active to be able to find benefit in their loved one's recovery. But there can be a trickle-down effect, that when a loved one starts to see their family member doing things differently, it just puts some different thoughts and ideas in their mind, and they may start to take some action themselves. That's a bonus if that happens. That's not the encouragement or the motivation in saying that you as a family member need to look at your own recovery, but it can definitely have a shift in the family dynamic, in the relationship, and in the household. So if you're in a household with multiple other members, engaging in recovery for yourself may have that trickle-down effect for other members of the household, maybe not the one who has addiction that's very active and front and center, but it might for the rest of the household, which can definitely help to improve their mental health and their resilience for moving forward in their own lives. So what does recovery for you look like? Well, it can be any or all of those things that I mentioned before. It involves a physical health component. It can involve an emotional and mental health component. So just learning how to de-stress, unpack feelings, deal with what's going on in your own mind and in your own heart. It involves relationships, healthy connection with people who truly support and are unconditionally supportive of you, as well as people who've maybe been in a similar situation as yourself and can provide some feedback. There can be a connection or a spiritual component beyond connection with other people, whether that is to nature. For some people it's a religious connection. For others it's a more kind of internal process that they connect to, maybe through things like meditation or prayer or rituals like that. There can also be a cultural component, so getting back to cultural traditions and events and routines that are meaningful to you. And there can also be a financial component, so financial health, financial boundaries, and looking at what that means for you and your household. So there's lots of different aspects to that wheel of health, and it's important to start investing in all of those as regularly as possible. And if you're starting to notice that you're encountering some challenges from your own mind, then that's also something you'll have to navigate around. You may need some additional outsider professional support to help you do that, because sometimes people, as much as they've been focused on their loved ones' addiction and problems, may also have addiction or mental health problems themselves, which are also contributing to some of the challenges that they're experiencing. So it's important that you start to regroup and really look at your own self, your own needs, your own health status, and what can be changed there to improve things for yourself, rather than focusing that energy on controlling or changing your loved one's behavior, because unfortunately they will only change when they're ready, willing, and able to do so. And you need to have the resources and the ability to go through that time while their addiction is more active and they're still not quite ready, able, or willing to seek out those changes for themselves. There's a lot more depth to this. It's a very individualized process, and that's where you may benefit from some individual support, meaning whether that's in a group or an individual counseling support, to really look at the details and the nuances of your personal case, because everyone's situation is different and will require some exploration. But I hope that this gives you a starting framework to look at. So looking at, first and foremost, your own recovery strategies and your own recovery self-care. Then that sets you up to look at boundaries, which we had discussed, and also just that acceptance of what you're working with and learning how to recognize that there's your loved one and then there's their addiction. So these two kind of competing elements within the same person, and so then modifying your boundaries and when you're engaging accordingly. I'm sure I'll have videos on this and other topics in future, because again, there is so much to it, but I hope that this gives you a starting framework and some things to think about for further reflection and or hopefully further action for yourself. And just a reminder that self-help videos and tools are not a complement or not a substitute for professional support, so assessment and treatment. If you are really struggling and if you are in a situation where you're living with active addiction, you may benefit from some additional support. So please talk to a healthcare provider in your local area to see what options are available to you. And remember that the self-help tools, they're great complements, but again, they're not substitutes. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you'll subscribe to the channel and hit the notifications bell. As I said, I have some topics planned for the future that I would like to go through, including that topic of learning how to distinguish between those different forces within our brains, of what I call the healthy part of the brain and then the not so healthy part of our brain. And we'll get into more about what that is, what that looks like, and what that means. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and take care of yourselves for now.